Hey there. Tonight let's wander through some quietly dramatic what-ifs. Big, serious questions, but told in the softest, slowest way, so your mind can drift gently to sleep. Let's begin with a heavy one. But don't worry, we'll go slow, south. Imagine, for some reason, no politics, no war rooms, no angry speeches, the world's nuclear arsenal, every last bomb, quietly agrees on one target. And let's say it's a city. Not a huge one, not a tiny one. Just a medium-sized city, somewhere on Earth. Maybe one you've never visited. Maybe one that just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The launch happens at midnight. Not to be cruel, midnight is simply quiet. People are sleeping. Streets are calm. It's almost respectful in a dark, terrible way. First, thousands of missile silos, submarines and hidden launch pads all over the world wake up at once. Not with explosions, just blinking lights, gentle hums, hydraulic arms lifting missiles skyward in dark forests, icy oceans and sun-scorched deserts. And then they launch. But not all at once. They rise in waves, like a very slow, very organised orchestra. Some take seconds to leave Earth's surface. Others take minutes. High above the world, they arc like fireflies. You might think it's beautiful if you didn't know what was coming next. In the upper atmosphere, thousands of missiles follow perfect, cold, mathematical curves. They pass over sleepy farms, empty highways, quiet oceans. No sirens sound in the city below. No alarms ring in the streets. No one expects this because it's never happened before. It's almost peaceful the way they glide toward their destination. If you were standing outside, far away, you might not hear anything at all. Just silence, and the stars above, and then, before the first bomb hits, there's a tiny moment of stillness. The kind of pause that always comes before something important happens. In that pause, the wind holds its breath. The leaves stop rustling. The birds stay silent in their nests. And for one impossible second, the city beneath those bombs sleeps on, wrapped in darkness and quiet dreams. And then, at once, the first bombs arrive. Not with a single crash, but like rain starting to fall. The first detonation lights the night like an artificial sunrise, a glow so bright, so fast that it leaves no shadows, only light itself. Seconds later, another bomb hits, then another, and another. They come in waves, dozens at a time, hundreds more following behind. The city's streets, buildings, parks and rooftops melt into the light. But strangely, from a distance, it all feels quiet. No human voice could rise above the roar. No windows remain to rattle in their frames. Even the echoes are drowned in light. Temperatures spike so high that asphalt turns to liquid in an instant. Cars disappear into glowing puddles of metal and glass. Trees flash into vapour without burning. Bricks shatter from heat before they can crumble from impact. And for miles around the city, the landscape flattens, clean, smooth, as though some giant had pressed a hot iron against the earth. But there's something weirdly peaceful in imagining it from far away. Up in space, satellites would watch a brief glowing bloom, a pulse, then fading quiet again. Each explosion sends shock waves rushing outward. They overlap and collide like ripples in a pond where someone's thrown not one, but 1,000 stones at once. At first the blast zones expand fast, but eventually they meet their limit. The earth cools, the air stops moving, and in that stillness the destruction has already happened. It's as if the world itself sighs, finishes its work and folds back into quiet. An hour later the sky's dark again, but now for a different reason. Thick clouds of dust, smoke and ash rise like mountains above the earth. Ash that will circle the planet for months, maybe years. Radiation clings to every surface in a radius wider than some countries, but radiation doesn't roar. It just exists, invisible, quiet, waiting for the winds to carry it wherever they will. And in the empty centre, where a city once stood, there's now a crater so deep and wide it could swallow a lake. Or perhaps, in time, it will. Meanwhile, far beyond the blast zone, the rest of the world watches in stunned, sleepy silence. No one speaks at first. Maybe they can't. Leaders look at their hands, unsure what there is left to press or sign. Scientists run models on computers that flicker like nightlights in darkened labs. Ordinary people stare at blank TV screens, as if expecting someone to explain it all away. But no one can. Not yet. So, Let's recap where we left off. We've imagined this terrifying hypothetical. Every single nuclear warhead from every country aimed at one city. All at once. The buttons pressed, the missiles launched, the countdown begun. The poor, unlucky city in question. Well, let's not name it just yet. Maybe it's New York, maybe it's Tokyo, maybe it's that quiet town where nothing ever happens and the biggest local scandal was someone double parking their car. But regardless of location, the first thing that happens is absolutely nothing. At least not for the first few minutes. Because despite what Hollywood movies tell us, missiles take time to reach their targets. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, can take anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes to cross the globe. So for about half an hour the world holds its collective breath. And then the sky turns into something biblical. Imagine hundreds of warheads streaking through the atmosphere, each one glowing with the heat of re-entry, like shooting stars from the nightmares of every Cold War general. But how many warheads are we talking about, really? Today, there are around 12,500 nuclear warheads in existence, give or take a few, depending on who's doing the counting and how honest they're being. Not all of them are active. Many are waiting in storage or being dismantled. But for the sake of our sleepy thought experiment, let's assume they're all ready to fly. So 12,500 nuclear bombs, most ranging from 100 kilotons to several megatons. For reference, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima was a mere 15 kilotons. So we're talking about, let's do some math. Literally thousands of times more destructive power than what we've seen in any real-world attack. When the first warheads detonate, the effects are instantaneous and horrifying. The centre of the blast becomes a sun on Earth. Temperatures soar to several million degrees Celsius. Buildings, cars, people, vaporized in the blink of an eye. Shockwaves race outward at supersonic speeds, flattening everything for miles. Firestorms ignite, turning what's left into an inferno. But here's where things get weird. After a few bombs go off, you hit a point of diminishing returns. There's only so much destruction one city can take before it's, gone, vaporized, reduced to rubble and dust. So what happens to the other 12,450 warheads still incoming? Funny thing about nuclear weapons, their blast radii start overlapping. The first bombs obliterate everything within 10 to 20 miles of ground zero. The next bombs, they're blowing up what's already been blown up. They're basically nuking the ashes. Eventually, the explosions aren't adding much to the destruction. They're just making the world's largest crater a little deeper. Kind of like throwing more water on something that's already underwater, but it gets worse. Or, depending on your perspective, more interesting. All those nuclear detonations kick an insane amount of debris, dust and radioactive particles into the atmosphere. We're talking hundreds of millions of tons of material. This is where we cross from local disaster to global catastrophe. The dust blocks out sunlight, temperatures drop worldwide, crops fail, famine spreads, welcome to nuclear winter. And the radiation, gamma rays, neutrons, and all sorts of nasty isotopes spread across the planet on the jet streams. Radiation poisoning isn't just for the unlucky people near the blast, it's now everyone's problem. So, in our scenario, one city gets obliterated beyond recognition, but the entire planet suffers. Ironically, the country that launched the nukes might suffer just as much as the one they targeted. No winners here. But let's rewind for a second. What would this look like from space? Satellites would capture a surreal sight. A massive, expanding fireball. A mushroom cloud unlike anything seen before, bigger than Krakatoa, bigger than the Chicxulub impact that wiped out the dinosaurs. And then, like bruises on the face of the Earth, you'd see other effects spreading. Cloud cover changes, dust storms, wildfire smoke, all from one city. And yet, after all the drama, the planet would keep spinning. Life elsewhere would go on, though much harder than before. Animals in distant forests might feel the chill but not understand why. People on the other side of the world would wake up to dark skies and colder nights, wondering if this is what the end feels like. But hold that thought. Let's dial back the drama just a bit. Because here's a strange question. What if, instead of blowing it all up at once, someone spread out those bombs, set them off one at a time over decades or centuries? Ironically, the long-term damage might be less catastrophic. The atmosphere could recover between detonations and the Earth would have time to heal. But no, in our scenario, subtlety has left the building. It's all about overkill, maximum destruction, maximum fallout. Which makes you wonder, why aim it all at one city in the first place? Why not spread the bombs across multiple strategic targets, like military sites, government bunkers, power plants, and so on? That's what actual nuclear war plans suggest. Even during the Cold War, the idea wasn't to flatten one city, but to cripple an entire nation's infrastructure. But again, that's not what we're here for. We're here to imagine a sleepy what-if, a ridiculous, impossible, but strangely fascinating scenario where every single bomb humanity ever built rains down on one lonely spot on the map. And honestly, that spot wouldn't even be a crater when the dust settled. It would be a hole, a scar on the planet's surface hundreds of feet deep, possibly visible from space for centuries to come. But what happens next? Well, for starters, the survivors, if there are any nearby, would be in for a rough time. Radiation sickness, collapsing infrastructure, food shortages. The global economy would tank overnight. Planes grounded, ships stranded at sea, power grids flickering and failing. And governments? Governments would scramble to respond. Emergency meetings at the United Nations, scientists calculating fallout zones, aid workers rushing toward disaster zones, only to realise there's nowhere left to help. And in the middle of all this chaos, somewhere far away, you'd probably find a handful of people quietly wondering, who thought this was a good idea? Now, as the dust settles, figuratively and literally, the world faces the aftermath. First, there's the local impact, which is frankly beyond comprehension. If you could somehow stand at the edge of the destruction, assuming your Geiger counter wasn't screaming at you to run away, you'd see a landscape straight out of science fiction. No buildings, no streets, no landmarks, just a vast blackened pit surrounded by charred earth and twisted remnants of what used to be civilization. But here's something unexpected. The earth, resilient old rock that it is, wouldn't just collapse into nothingness. Beneath the city, the mantle and crust would hold steady. Sure, you'd have a crater, but the planet itself wouldn't crack open like an egg. No doomsday movie earthquake splitting continents in half. Earth's tectonic plates have survived asteroid impacts far worse than this. Still, this would be the biggest human-made explosion in history by many orders of magnitude. Even the largest nuclear test ever, the Soviet Tsar bomber at 50 megatons, would look like a firecracker next to this monstrosity. But what's happening to the atmosphere above? Well, that's where the real long-term trouble brews. The blast would send smoke and soot high into the stratosphere, where there's no rain to wash it away. Unlike volcanic eruptions, which mainly release ash that settles within a few years, this nuclear soot could stay aloft for a decade or more. And what does soot do up there? It blocks sunlight. Global temperatures would plunge by several degrees Celsius. Crops would fail worldwide. We'd be staring down the barrel of a man-made ice age. Scientists have modelled this scenario before, though admittedly not on quite this scale. A small nuclear war between two nations could lower global temperatures enough to cause widespread famine. So multiply that by every bomb on Earth. And, well, dinner's going to be scarce for a while. But wait, you might say, what about the ozone layer? Excellent question, sleepy thinker. Nuclear explosions release nitrogen oxides, which destroy ozone molecules. Without the ozone layer, harmful ultraviolet rays would flood the surface, damaging plants, animals, and human skin alike. Sunburns for everyone. Crops shriveling not just from the cold, but from sun damage when the clouds finally clear. And radiation, well, it's not just contained to the blast zone. Fallout particles hitch rides on the wind, settling thousands of miles away. Radioactive cesium, iodine, and strontium would contaminate soil, rivers, and oceans far from the target. Fish? Contaminated. Milk? Contaminated. That organic kale you paid extra for? Sorry, also glowing in the dark. But despite all this horror, some life would survive. Bacteria, fungi, insects, they've been through worse. Chernobyl today is teeming with wildlife. Not healthy wildlife, mind you, but life nonetheless. And humans? In distant countries, people would adapt. They'd wear protective gear, develop new agricultural methods, maybe even move underground for a while. Cities on the other side of the world might become crowded sanctuaries, welcoming refugees from the blast's aftermath. Life would go on, uncomfortable, irradiated, cold, but on. Now, if we take a cosmic step back, this scenario offers a strange comfort, because despite our terrifying capacity for destruction, humanity still couldn't destroy the Earth itself. Life might suffer, ecosystems might collapse, but the planet, it'd still spin, orbiting the sun, waiting patiently for life to rebuild. In fact, if you came back in a few million years, you'd probably see new species evolving, filling the gaps left by the disaster. Giant radioactive squirrels? Maybe. Intelligent cockroaches? Hopefully not. But life, in some form, would find a way. And yet, there's another unsettling thought lurking in this sleepy scenario. If every nation fired their nukes at one city, what happens politically the next day? Think about it. Dozens of world powers simultaneously agreeing on one target, coordinating their launches, and then, what? High-fiving each other? Declaring world peace? Probably not. More likely chaos ensues. Governments collapse from public outrage. Military alliances fracture. Civil wars break out as populations question their leaders' sanity. So, in a darkly ironic twist, concentrating all nuclear destruction on one city might prevent World War III, because all the bombs are gone. But the global instability that follows, that's a whole new kind of disaster. And then, of course, there's the question nobody wants to ask, but you're probably thinking about, which city would it be? Choosing a target for such an apocalyptic event is a geopolitical nightmare. No nation would volunteer. Every nation would argue why it shouldn't be them. Neutral countries would protest. The UN would deadlock. And in the end, someone would probably flip a coin. Or more realistically, wage another war over the decision. But let's not end on that grim note. Instead, picture this. Somewhere far away from the chaos, in a quiet forest or on a distant island, a small group of people sits around a campfire. They're telling stories, roasting what little food they have left, and wondering aloud how humanity ever thought it was a good idea to build so many bombs in the first place. And in that moment, under a darkened, dust-filled sky, there's a tiny flicker of hope. Because if we can imagine this scenario and recognise how foolish it would be, maybe, just maybe, we can also imagine a world where we never let it happen. Now let's gently zoom out and ask something much less apocalyptic. What would happen to the environment itself? Beyond the rubble, beyond the radiation, beyond the clouds of ash and soot, the planet's ecosystems would undergo strange and gradual changes. First, let's talk about the oceans. You might think the oceans would be spared, right? After all, the bombs didn't detonate underwater, but sadly, no. The sudden cooling of the atmosphere would disrupt ocean currents. You know how the Gulf Stream keeps parts of Europe relatively warm? Well, if that current slowed down or even stopped, places like the UK and Scandinavia would feel more like Siberia. And coral reefs, already stressed from climate change, would struggle with sudden cold snaps and lack of sunlight filtering through the soot-filled skies. Meanwhile, on land, forests would become ghostly remnants. Without sunlight, trees couldn't photosynthesize, and many species would wither away. But fungi, those humble recyclers of decay, would flourish, breaking down dead plant matter and creating strange, pale forests of mushrooms and mould. Imagine walking through a world where towering mushrooms replace the oaks and pines. A bit surreal, but oddly peaceful. And what about the animals? Well, some species would perish quickly, especially larger mammals who need lots of food. But others, like rats, cockroaches and crows, would adapt and thrive. Nature has a way of favouring the scrappy survivors. Even pets wouldn't be entirely spared. Domesticated dogs and cats might revert to their wild instincts, forming packs and colonies to survive in the ruins. Somewhere out there, you could imagine a radioactive tabby cat perched on the broken frame of a skyscraper, watching the silent, empty streets below. But remember, this is a sleepy what-if, not a horror movie. So let's ease back into our cosy thought experiment. After all this devastation, what would the timeline for recovery look like? Let's consult the history of Earth itself. After the asteroid impact that ended the dinosaurs, life bounced back in a few million years. Yes, that's a long time for us, but it's a blink of an eye on a planetary scale. And compared to that asteroid, our little nuclear catastrophe is smaller, though still catastrophic. So we're probably looking at decades of darkness, centuries of ecological chaos, and maybe a few thousand years before things stabilise again. But stabilise they would. Eventually plants would return, grasses would creep into the cracked concrete, trees would regrow, animals would repopulate abandoned cities, and perhaps, someday far in the future, someone, or something, would stumble across the ruins of the crater and wonder what on earth had happened here. Maybe they'd find our old warning signs, our decayed monuments, and try to piece together the story of a species that built thousands of world-ending bombs and fired them all at one poor doomed city. They'd probably shake their heads, if they had heads, and think, well, that was a choice. But let's leave the distant future alone for now. What about the immediate survivors? In places far from the blast zone, people would adapt to a colder, darker world. Greenhouses with artificial lights would pop up. Indoor farming would become essential. Electricity grids might be powered by whatever energy sources remain functional. Hydroelectric, geothermal, maybe even some nuclear plants that survived the global shutdown. Society would change too. Governments might collapse, replaced by smaller local communities focused on survival. Money could lose its meaning, replaced by barter systems or resource-sharing networks. People would return to basics: food, water, warmth, safety. Education would shift as well. No longer focused on technological progress, but on survival skills, first aid, radiation safety, and sustainable farming. A strange, quiet world where campfire storytelling makes a comeback simply because there's not much else to do during the long, cold nights. And what would people tell their children? Probably stories of the time before, of blue skies and bustling cities, of electric cars and smartphones, of a world that once felt invincible. And maybe, just maybe, they'd warn them never to build such weapons again. Though history tells us, we're not always great at learning from our mistakes. But let's not drift too far into cynicism. Even in this bleak scenario, humanity's creativity might shine through. Artists would still paint using whatever pigments they could find. Musicians would still compose songs, even if only on battered acoustic guitars. Poets would write verses by candlelight, because that's what we do. In the darkest times, humans create beauty. Even if the skies are grey and the air is cold, there's always room for hope, for laughter, for connection. So while the first few decades after our catastrophic event would be difficult, they wouldn't be devoid of joy entirely. Small joys, perhaps. A warm meal, a good story, a clear night sky not hidden by ash. And speaking of the sky, there's an odd silver lining in all of this. With so much dust blocking artificial light and much of modern infrastructure knocked offline, the night sky would be stunning. No light pollution, no planes streaking overhead, just stars, billions of them, as bright and clear as our distant ancestors saw them. Imagine lying on a blanket of cold earth, wrapped in whatever ragged clothes you have, staring up at a sky so full of stars it almost feels like the universe is apologising for what you've been through, and maybe, just maybe, in that moment you'd smile. But what happens when the dust finally begins to settle, literally and metaphorically? After a few decades, the skies would slowly start to clear. Rain would gradually wash radioactive particles out of the atmosphere. Forests would hesitantly regrow. Animals would venture into abandoned zones, first by accident, then by instinct. And the crater, the vast, lifeless scar where the city once stood, would begin to erode. Wind and rain would wear down the sharp edges. Grasses and weeds would push through the cracks. Over time, nature would reclaim even this place of unimaginable devastation. But for the people left behind, the world would feel different. Languages might evolve in isolation, with survivors forming new dialects and slang words suited for their new, simpler lives. Traditions would change, blending the old world's customs with the hard lessons learned from the catastrophe. Maybe there'd even be festivals commemorating the day the skies burned. A strange holiday where people light small symbolic fires to remember, but also to remind themselves, never again. And slowly, over generations, humans would rebuild. Cities might rise again, though smaller and more resilient. Energy would come from renewable sources, not uranium and plutonium. Perhaps governments would be decentralized, societies built on cooperation rather than competition, although knowing human nature there'd probably still be the occasional argument over who gets the last jar of pickles. Technology wouldn't disappear entirely. Knowledge would survive in old books, forgotten servers, and the memories of the people who lived through it all. The internet as we know it might fade away, but in its place, maybe communities would create local networks, digital islands in a vast sea of wilderness. And as for the story of what happened, well, it would change in the telling. The first survivors would tell their children about the warheads and the bombs, about the governments and military leaders who pressed the buttons. But their children's children might turn it into something different. A myth, perhaps. A cautionary tale of hubris and fire raining from the skies. Over time it might lose its technological explanation and become a legend, the day the gods punished humanity's arrogance. History has a way of becoming mythology when enough time passes, but let's pull back once more and end on a quieter, more peaceful note. If you visited Earth 1,000 years after this event, assuming you had a very sturdy hazmat suit, you'd find a planet that looks surprisingly alive. Different, sure, but still teeming with life. Forests would carpet the land once again. Animals would fill the forests and plains, many of them distant cousins of today's species, adapted to the new world. The oceans would recover too, eventually filtering out the pollutants and supporting marine life again. Whales would sing their low, rumbling songs through dark, cold waters. Coral reefs would begin to rebuild from fragments left untouched in the depths. And that crater, the original ground zero, would no longer be a scar. It might become a lake, filled with rainwater, surrounded by forests. Birds might nest along its rocky shores. Deer might drink from its still waters. To anyone who stumbled upon it, it would seem like just another beautiful, strange landscape. And maybe, somewhere nearby, a curious child would ask their parent, "What happened here?" And the parent, staring into the rippling water, would say something like, "A long time ago, people forgot how precious this world is, and this was the price we paid, but we learned, and we've done better since then." Maybe they'd be right, maybe not. But in that quiet moment, with the wind rustling the trees and the water reflecting the sky, you'd feel something deeply human, the hope that our mistakes don't define us forever. Because if there's one thing we know about life, it's that it's stubborn, it clings on, it grows back, it finds a way forward, even through the worst of times. So while the idea of every atomic bomb striking one city is terrifying beyond words, it also serves as a sleepy little reminder. No matter how much we break, there's always a chance to rebuild. And perhaps tonight, as you drift off to sleep, that's the thought to hold on to. The world spins on, the stars still shine, and tomorrow is another chance to get it right. All right, let's tuck ourselves in, adjust our pillows, and wander off into another impossible, strangely calming thought experiment. This time, let's look up, way up, into the night sky. You've seen it countless times, haven't you? That glowing, familiar face hovering above us. The moon. Constant. Comforting. Sometimes full and bright, sometimes a faint crescent, but always there. But what if, just for one night, it wasn't? Imagine looking up at sunset and noticing something odd. No silver glow rising in the east. No soft, pale light reflecting off rooftops and tree branches. Just a dark, empty sky where the moon should be. And no, it didn't explode. It didn't shatter into 1,000 pieces. It didn't turn into an evil robot. It simply vanished. Like someone had quietly taken it down for repairs and promised to bring it back tomorrow. So, what happens next? Well, for starters, the world would feel a little darker. Literally. The moon is the second brightest object in our night sky after the sun, and without it, nighttime would feel noticeably gloomier. Cities wouldn't care much. Streetlights and glowing billboards drown out the stars anyway. But rural areas and remote villages would be cast into an eerie, inky darkness. Animals that rely on moonlight would notice immediately. Nocturnal hunters like owls and foxes, who use the faint light to stalk their prey, might struggle to find a midnight snack. Prey animals like rabbits and mice, usually cautious under the full moon spotlight, might breathe a sigh of relief and venture out with a little more confidence. But there'd also be confusion. Sea turtles, for instance, use the moon's reflection on the ocean to navigate back to the water after hatching. Without that silvery path, they might wander the wrong way, toward highways and hotels instead of waves. And let's not forget the tides. The moon's gravity is the main driver of Earth's ocean tides. It pulls on our watery surfaces, creating the familiar rise and fall we see at the beach. Without the moon, tides wouldn't just vanish, but they'd shrink dramatically. The sun also affects tides, but it's much farther away, meaning it has only about half the tidal influence of the moon. So, for one night, coastal areas would experience much weaker high and low tides, probably enough to notice, but not enough to leave ships stranded or beaches permanently dry. Fishermen might scratch their heads. Surfers would be disappointed. Crabs, used to their rhythmic moonlit foraging, would be thoroughly confused. Meanwhile, astrologers and full moon fanatics would be in a mild state of panic. Social media would explode with blurry phone pictures of an empty sky, followed by hashtags like "Where is the moon?" and "Bring back the moon" trending worldwide. And somewhere, quietly sipping coffee, a few tired astronomers would rub their temples and say, "Yes, we noticed. No, we don't know where it went either." But now for a deeper question. Does the moon disappearing affect anything on a geological level in just one night? The answer: not much. Earth's orbit, its spin, its wobbly axis, all those stay stable over short time frames. One night without the moon wouldn't send the planet careening into the sun or cause sudden earthquakes. Those changes take thousands, even millions of years. But something subtle would feel off. You see, the moon stabilizes Earth's tilt, keeping our seasons relatively mild and predictable. Without it, the Earth would eventually wobble more, like a spinning top slowing down. Over millions of years, this could swing our climate wildly from ice ages to tropical heat waves. But that's long-term stuff. For tonight, you just have a darker sky, weaker tides, and a general sense of something missing. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. For thousands of years, humans have looked to the moon for comfort, for calendars, for myths and stories. It's been our companion in the night, our cosmic neighbour. Its absence would be more than scientific. It would be emotional. Poets would sigh. Dreamers would frown. Wolves might forget to howl. But now let's take it a step further, because why not? What would happen to Earth's night sky if the moon were gone? Suddenly stars would shine brighter than most people have ever seen. Even in cities where light pollution usually washes them out, the absence of moonlight would reveal a breathtakingly rich sky. Constellations that were faint and distant would pop into view like sparkling freckles on a velvet blanket. The Milky Way, stretching across the heavens, would become a centerpiece again, no longer competing with the moon's glare. It would be beautiful, quiet, almost magical, and for stargazers, astronomers, and the occasional night owl wandering outside in their pyjamas, it might be the clearest sky they've ever seen. But of course, the real question is, where did the moon go? That's a mystery we'll solve later. For now, let's just lie here, cozy and sleepy, staring up at a moonless sky and wondering what the universe might look like with one less familiar friend watching over us. Because sometimes it's in the absence of something that we appreciate it most. And tomorrow, maybe it'll be back. So what happens when morning comes? The sun rises as it always does, and for a brief moment the world forgets that anything was different. People get up, brush their teeth, feed their pets, and head to work or school. But somewhere, quietly lingering in the back of everyone's mind, is that nagging question. Wait, wasn't something missing last night? And sure enough, scientists would be all over this mystery by sunrise. Space agencies like NASA, the European Space Agency, and the countless amateur astronomers who didn't get any sleep would be scrambling for answers. Telescopes would be turned skyward. Radio dishes would scan the void where the moon used to be. And deep space satellites would send back images confirming what we already knew. The moon just wasn't there. No fragments, no debris, no smoke, no explanation. It didn't explode. It didn't drift away. It was simply gone. But then something truly strange happens. As dusk falls the following evening, people step outside, look up, and there it is, perfectly intact, perfectly positioned, as if it had never left. A full, glowing moon, hanging in the sky like nothing happened. And that's where things get really interesting, because scientists would want answers. Immediately. Where did it go? How did it come back? Did it teleport? Slip through another dimension? Was it briefly borrowed by extraterrestrial moon thieves? Of course, the more likely explanations would be less dramatic. Maybe it was some massive cosmic anomaly. Maybe reality itself hiccuped. Maybe, in ways we can't yet explain, something shifted for just one night. Or maybe, just maybe, this whole thing was meant to remind us how much we take the moon for granted. But let's pause our cosmic conspiracy theories and go back to what changed in the meantime. See, for that one moonless night, the world got a tiny preview of life without its lunar companion. Without the moon's bright face lighting the way, people noticed stars they hadn't seen since childhood. The darkness brought stillness to cities that never sleep. Animals behaved differently. The tides were calmer, gentler. Fishermen, who'd struggled with the low tides the night before, would see the familiar patterns returning. Sea turtles, who may have wandered the wrong way in confusion, would finally find their moonlit guide back to the sea. Nature, it turns out, is wonderfully adaptable, but humans, we'd probably keep asking questions. Books would be written, documentaries filmed, debate panels held late into the night. Some would claim it was a government experiment, others would insist it was a sign from the universe. And of course, there would be those who'd shrug and say, "Hey, things happen." But deep down, people might feel a quiet sense of awe, because for one night we saw our world a little differently. Now, let's explore one more side effect, something more philosophical than physical. Without the moon's presence, we would lose more than tides and nightlight. We'd lose a part of our culture. The moon has been a muse for countless poems, songs and stories. It's inspired love letters, lullabies, and late-night conversations on balconies. Ancient civilizations built calendars around its cycles. Festivals and rituals timed their celebrations to the full moon's rise. Take the moon away, even for one night, and you remove a thread from humanity's shared story. But then it comes back, and oh, how much sweeter it is to see it again. Children would point at it with renewed wonder. Couples would sit under its soft glow with a little more appreciation. And night owls like you and me? Well, we'd give it a knowing nod before pulling the covers over our heads and drifting off to sleep. Because sometimes, absence really does make the heart grow fonder. And so, the world spins on, tides return to normal, and the moon continues its ancient, silent journey around our planet. But every now and then, on clear nights when the stars feel just a little too bright, you might catch yourself wondering, could it happen again? Could the moon take another night off someday, slipping quietly away without a word of explanation? And if it did, would we panic? Or would we simply light a candle, step outside and enjoy the deep, quiet darkness for what it is, an unexpected gift from the universe? But for now, the moon stays put, and the tides roll in and out as they always have. So as you lie there drifting deeper into sleep, let this thought soothe your mind. The moon is up there tonight, watching over you, quiet, steady, patient, and tomorrow night it'll be there again. Probably. But now let's indulge our imagination just a little further, because why stop here, right? What if the moon disappearing for a night wasn't just some cosmic accident or strange prank of the universe? What if it was part of a bigger pattern? Imagine this. Every year, on exactly the same night, the moon vanishes, like a lunar holiday where our closest neighbour takes a brief vacation, Moon Day, or perhaps no moon night. How would the world adapt? Well, the first few times would cause chaos, sure, but humans are adaptable creatures. After a few years, we'd start preparing for it. Cities would light extra street lamps. Coastal towns would mark their calendars, adjusting fishing schedules and tide charts to account for the weaker tidal forces. Schools would teach kids about moonless night safety, complete with emergency flashlights and turtle rescue squads patrolling the beaches. There would be traditions too. Festivals dedicated to the stars which shine brighter without the moon's glow. People might gather in parks and mountaintops, telescopes pointed skyward, enjoying one perfect night of uninterrupted starlight each year. And storytellers, the storytellers would have a field day. They'd spin tales of why the moon leaves us. Maybe it goes to visit distant galaxies, or it takes a break from watching over us, sipping cosmic tea on the far side of the universe. Or perhaps, some would whisper, it simply grows tired of humanity for one night a year and decides to disappear in protest. Whatever the reason, it would become a night of reflection, a pause in our busy lives. For one night, we'd be reminded of how fragile and fleeting things can be. But then, like clockwork, the moon would return, silent, glowing, as if nothing happened. and the world would breathe a collective sigh of relief. Now, back to the science for a moment. You might wonder, what about the moon's orbit? If the moon truly vanished, even for a moment, it would technically break the delicate gravitational balance between Earth and its satellite. Our planet would feel a sudden, albeit tiny, shift in its gravitational tug-of-war. Satellites orbiting Earth might wobble, GPS systems might glitch, ocean tides would miss their usual cues. But since the moon returns the next night, Earth's systems would stabilise again, like a pendulum returning to its steady swing after a brief nudge. It's a little like briefly removing one of the weights from a spinning top, then replacing it before it falls over. The top wobbles, but keeps spinning. And life? Life would adapt. The animals that hunt, hide, or sing by moonlight would slowly learn to adjust their rhythms. Maybe some species would evolve behaviours that sync with the moonless night. Imagine a species of birds that only sing when the moon is absent, filling the dark skies with eerie melodies once a year. Or plants that bloom only under the star-only sky, saving their brightest blossoms for that rare moonless moment. Nature loves patterns, after all, and humans? Oh, we'd throw moonless night parties, glow-in-the-dark face paint, lantern festivals, poetry readings under the stars. Maybe it would even become a quiet night of rest for some, a time when we turn off our screens, step outside and marvel at how vast the universe really is when we stop and look up. Because it's easy to forget, isn't it? With all our technology, lights, and constant noise, we rarely take a moment to feel small in the best possible way. But on a moonless night, when the universe stretches out endlessly above us, that feeling comes naturally. Now, some would worry about the symbolism of the moon disappearing. In many cultures, the moon represents balance, femininity, and the passage of time. Losing it, even temporarily, might feel like losing part of ourselves. But perhaps that's why its return would mean so much more. The moon vanishes and then comes back, like hope returning after despair, like light breaking through darkness, like the quiet reassurance that even when things seem lost, they might only be gone for a little while. And maybe that's the quiet lesson of this strange thought experiment. Sometimes absence teaches us appreciation. We spend our lives assuming that the constants in our world, our routines, our comforts, our little glowing companions in the sky, will always be there. But what if they weren't? What if just for one night the universe reminded us not to take them for granted? And when they return, when the moon rises again, full and bright and familiar, we see it with fresh eyes, not just as a lump of rock orbiting our planet, but as a quiet, steady friend who's been with us through countless nights, countless stories, countless dreams. So as you close your eyes tonight, drifting off to sleep, maybe give a little nod of thanks to that silver guardian in the sky. Because if it disappeared tomorrow, well, you'd probably miss it more than you realise. But let's finish this little cosmic bedtime story with one final thought. What if the moon knew? No, I don't mean it has feelings or a secret moon brain somewhere under the craters. But what if, in a poetic way, the moon understood its importance to us? Like an old steady lighthouse keeper who never misses a shift, always there, always shining no matter what storms pass below. And what if that one night away was simply the moon's way of reminding us, I've been here for billions of years, lighting your nights, pulling your tides, guiding your stories. Maybe just once you should see what life is like without me. Kind of like when someone slips quietly out of a room just to see if anyone notices. And oh, how we'd notice. So when the moon returned the next night as quietly as it left, you can bet we'd pay a little more attention. We might stay up a little later to watch it rise. We might pause during a nighttime walk and smile at its glow. We might tell our kids, that's the moon. It left once, but it came back. And maybe, just maybe, we'd write new stories about that night. Folktales passed down from generation to generation. The night the moon took a vacation. The night the stars stole the spotlight. The night the darkness was just a little too quiet. And future stargazers, lying in grassy fields, would wonder if it would ever happen again. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But isn't that the beauty of it? The universe keeps its secrets. And as we drift off to sleep beneath the returning moonlight, we're reminded that we don't have to know everything. Some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. Because in a world filled with noise, sometimes it's nice to simply wonder. So tonight, as you nestle deeper under the covers, let your thoughts float up through the dark sky, past the rooftops, beyond the trees, and into the vast quiet where the moon keeps its silent watch. Whether it stays or slips away again tomorrow, well, that's tomorrow's story. But for now, it's there. Calm, quiet, waiting. Just like sleep. Good night, moon. Good night, world. All right, let's get cozy again, take a deep breath, and drift into another question that absolutely no one asked. Except maybe you, lying awake at night, wondering about the quietest apocalypse imaginable. What if? The wind just stopped, not slowed down, not changed direction. I mean, completely stopped. No breezes rustling the leaves, no gusts blowing hats off heads, no howling storms, no gentle sighs through open windows. Just stillness. Picture stepping outside on what should be an ordinary morning, but instead of the usual breeze brushing your face, you feel nothing. The trees aren't moving. The flags hang limp, frozen in place. The air feels thick and heavy, almost like time itself has taken a coffee break. At first you might think, calm day. But then you notice something stranger. The clouds. They're just sitting there, not drifting across the sky, not slowly gliding past like lazy parade floats. They're frozen, as if someone paused the sky itself. And that's when it hits you. Something's very wrong. See, we take wind for granted. It's always there, whispering through forests, roaring across plains, filling sails and spinning turbines. But wind isn't just for making plastic bags dance across parking lots. It's essential. Wind moves heat around the planet. It balances temperatures between the scorching tropics and the freezing poles. Without it, the Earth's climate would get weird. So what happens first? Temperatures spike and plummet in weird places. The equator becomes unbearably hot because all the warm air just sits there, roasting like a forgotten pizza. Meanwhile, the poles grow colder and colder since no warm air comes to soften their icy grip. Places like Europe and North America, which rely on winds like the jet stream to bring weather systems across continents, would fall into strange stagnant patterns. One region might suffer endless heat waves, while another freezes beneath unmoving clouds. Weather, it turns out, is a team sport, and without wind, the team stops playing. But let's zoom in a little closer. On the ground, the effects are both subtle and unsettling. Smoke from chimneys doesn't drift away. It rises in a thin, lonely column and just lingers. Pollution builds up over cities because nothing's pushing it away. Air quality drops fast. Cities like Los Angeles, Beijing and Delhi, already struggling with smog, would find themselves wrapped in thick, choking blankets of dirty air. People would cough, visibility would drop, masks would become more common. Again, and if you've got allergies, oh boy, pollen, dust, spores, normally whisked away by the breeze, would hang stubbornly in the air, turning every breath into a sneezy gamble. But that's just the start. Let's take a sleepy stroll over to the oceans. Without wind, the surface of the sea becomes eerily calm. No waves, no whitecaps, no rolling surf. It's peaceful. Until you remember that wind drives the surface currents of the oceans. Currents like the Gulf Stream, which carries warm water from the tropics up the eastern coast of North America and across to Europe, would slow down. Without that conveyor belt of heat, Europe would chill dramatically. Summers would become mild, winters harsh. Countries used to warm ocean breezes would suddenly feel more like the Arctic. And marine life? Oh, they'd notice too. Many fish species rely on nutrient-rich waters being stirred up by wind-driven currents. Without that mixing, the oceans become stagnant deserts. Fish populations would crash. Fishing industries would collapse. And let's not forget about rain. Wind carries moisture-laden air over land, where it cools and falls as rain. Without that delivery system, many areas would dry out. Farmlands would suffer, rivers would shrink, forests would brown and crackle. It wouldn't be long before droughts, heat waves, and failed crops started reshaping economies and food supplies worldwide. But strangely enough, some places would experience the opposite: endless rain. Because without wind to push storm clouds along, they'd sit over the same area for days or weeks, dumping rain until the ground couldn't take it anymore. Imagine a single thunderstorm parked over your house for 7 straight days. Cozy at first, terrifying by day 4. But now, let's get a little closer to home. Wind isn't just about global systems, it's part of everyday life. No gentle breeze to cool you on a hot day. No rustling leaves to break the silence of the afternoon. No autumn gusts scattering golden leaves down your street. Kites stay grounded, wind chimes go silent, sailboats drift aimlessly, stranded in the water. Even things you never noticed before stop working the way they should. Planes, for example. Wind provides lift assistance for takeoffs and landings. Without it, airports might have to adjust their procedures. Flights could still operate, but things would feel off. Wind turbines, meanwhile, would sit useless, their blades frozen in place, depriving the world of a significant source of clean energy. And speaking of energy, without wind to stir the air, temperature differences between night and day would become extreme. Hot places would bake in the sun all day with no breeze to cool them off, and then freeze at night as the trapped heat radiates into space. Deserts would become ovens by day, icy plains by night. But here's the eeriest part of all. Silence. True, complete silence. No wind whistling through cracks in windows. No distant whoosh through power lines. No comforting background hum as the breeze plays in the trees. Just stillness. A quiet so profound it would be almost unsettling. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. And maybe you'd find yourself holding your breath too, listening for something, anything that isn't there. And in that silence, something strange happens. You start to notice sounds you've never paid attention to before. The quiet ticking of a distant clock, the hum of electricity running through wires, the faint rhythmic thud of your own heartbeat. Without the wind to fill the empty spaces, the world feels oddly exposed, as if someone has turned off the background music of life, leaving only the raw, unfiltered noise of existence. But while you're standing there in this eerie stillness, something else begins to change. Air pollution, remember all that smoke, dust and exhaust hanging motionless in the atmosphere, starts to settle. Without wind to scatter it, these particles eventually drift downward, coating streets, buildings and plants with a fine layer of grime. Rain, where it falls, struggles to wash it away because there's no breeze to carry the clean scent of fresh air across the landscape. The world feels stagnant, still, stuck, and people begin to notice. In big cities, residents might develop respiratory problems from the build-up of stagnant air. Hospitals would see more cases of asthma and bronchitis. Weather forecasts would go from predicting sunny skies or scattered showers to simply saying, still, again. Businesses dependent on the wind, sailing companies, wind energy firms, outdoor events would grind to a halt. Farmers would struggle with strange new weather patterns. Crops that rely on breezes for pollination, like many fruits and nuts, would produce less food. Even bees, whose flight patterns are subtly shaped by the wind, might struggle to navigate. And while humans would adapt in typical human fashion, installing fans, purifiers and artificial breeze generators, the natural world wouldn't adjust so easily. Ecosystems that have evolved with wind over millions of years would falter. Wind-dispersed seeds would fall directly beneath their parent plants, crowding the soil and competing for resources. Certain insects which rely on breezes to carry pheromones and scents to mates would struggle to find one another. And birds, accustomed to gliding on thermals and air currents, would find flying much harder, flapping endlessly without the help of a tailwind to carry them along. Some species would adapt, others wouldn't. And slowly, over time, the world would start to change. But here's a comforting thought. Wind isn't gone forever in this scenario, it's just taking a break. Let's imagine this stillness lasts only a day or two, a brief pause, like the earth catching its breath. On the second morning, the air feels heavy and expectant, like the world is waiting for something, and then, far off in the distance, a single leaf stirs. You almost miss it. But there it is, a faint rustle, then a breeze, tentative at first, brushing across your face like a forgotten memory. The trees sigh, the flags lift from their drooping rest, and just like that the wind is back. You'd hear the gentle whoosh of leaves in the trees, the distant hum of air rushing through alleys and fields, and perhaps, finally, the sweet relief of fresh moving air washing the stagnation away. Smog clears, dust scatters, and the world feels alive again. Birds spread their wings and soar without endless flapping. Pollinators find their flowers. Seeds drift across meadows, finding new places to grow. It's almost like someone hit play after the world sat on pause, and maybe, just maybe, we'd appreciate it a little more than before, because wind is one of those quiet, invisible things we forget to be grateful for. It cools us on summer days, it fills our sails and spins our turbines, it shapes deserts and carves canyons. It's been here long before us and will be here long after, but sometimes it takes losing something, even briefly, to realise how much it matters. So the next time you feel the wind on your face, gentle or fierce, maybe take a moment to notice it. Close your eyes, breathe it in, and feel the quiet reminder that the world is still spinning, still breathing, still moving forward. Because even in a still world, motion finds a way back, and as you drift off to sleep tonight, wrapped in stillness or rocked gently by the breeze outside your window maybe, just maybe, you'll find comfort in that thought. The wind always returns. But before we let this quiet little story drift away on the breeze, assuming the breeze has finally returned, let's ask one final question. What if the wind had feelings? Maybe, like the moon in our last story, the wind got tired. Tired of being blamed for bad hair days, tired of knocking over patio furniture, tired of being described as annoying, harsh or unwanted. And so, one day, it simply stopped. No explanation, no warning, just silence. Maybe it wanted to see if we noticed. And oh, we noticed. We noticed in the still heavy air that clung to our skin, in the smoke that didn't drift away, in the eerie silence of forests and plains that should have been filled with rustling leaves and whispering grasses. And then, after we'd missed it long enough, after we'd remembered how much we actually appreciated it, the wind returned. Not with a roar, but with a gentle sigh, like an old friend slipping back into the room, smiling softly, as if to say, "See? You missed me." And we did. Because the wind is one of those quiet constants of life, brushing past us without asking for thanks. It's the invisible hand that turns windmills, cools sun-baked cities, scatters seeds across fields and carries laughter down empty streets. It hums through mountains, races over oceans, and whispers secrets through the branches of ancient trees. And in its absence, we realise that silence, as peaceful as it can be, sometimes needs a little movement. Because life, like wind, is meant to flow. So maybe, as you drift off tonight, wrapped in stillness, you'll find yourself listening for the faintest breeze outside your window. Not because you need it to fall asleep, but because it's nice to know the world is still breathing, still alive, still in motion, still full of the small, quiet things we so often forget to notice. So let the wind carry you gently into sleep, and when you wake up tomorrow, step outside, close your eyes, and feel it on your face, cool, soft, familiar. That's the world, saying good morning, and with that, our strange little journey through sleepy what-ifs comes to an end. For now. From a city buried beneath thousands of nuclear blasts, to a sky missing its moon, to a world where the wind paused for just a moment, each scenario, as unlikely as they are, reminds us of something simple. This world is strange, fragile, beautiful, and sometimes it's the quiet things, the background characters of life, that matter most when they're gone. So as you tuck yourself in, close your eyes, and let your thoughts drift away, remember, the moon is still out there, the wind is still blowing, and no one, hopefully, is firing 12,500 nuclear warheads at the same city. Sleep well, curious mind, the world keeps turning. All right, cozy up again, take a slow breath, and let's wander into our next sleepy little disaster. This time, we're not looking up at the skies or out across still oceans. We're looking down, beneath our feet. Because buried under mountains, fields and cities, there's a world of molten rock quietly bubbling away, waiting for its moment. Volcanoes, hundreds of them, scattered across the earth like angry pimples on a teenager's face. Some towering proudly above ground, others hidden beneath oceans and ice sheets, quietly waiting, quietly rumbling. Now imagine, just for fun, that every single one of them decided to erupt at the exact same time. Yes, every volcano. Active ones, dormant ones. The ones nobody even knew existed until they blew the roof off some forgotten mountain range. What would that look like? Well, first let's count them. Scientists estimate there are about 1,500 active volcanoes on land, and thousands more on the seafloor. In total, maybe 50,000 volcanic vents, cracks and calderas scattered across the globe. If they all went off at once, well, first, the noise. The planet would sound like a billion fireworks going off, but lower, deeper, angrier. The kind of sound you don't just hear, you feel in your bones. Earthquakes would ripple outward in waves, shaking every continent, every island, every forgotten desert shack. Skies would darken instantly as ash clouds rise like dark mountains into the atmosphere. Entire regions would go pitch black in the middle of the day, and then comes the lava. Torrents of molten rock spilling down mountainsides, swallowing forests, rivers, highways and towns. But the real chaos, it's in the air. Volcanoes don't just spit out lava, they launch sulfur dioxide, ash and fine particles into the stratosphere. And when enough of that gets up there, sunlight struggles to get through. It's called volcanic winter. The last time a single volcano, Mount Tambora, erupted in 1815, it cooled the planet enough to cause the year without a summer. Crops failed. Snow fell in June. People froze and starved across Europe and North America, and that was just one volcano. Now multiply that by thousands. Temperatures would plunge across the planet. Daylight would dim for months, maybe years. Crops would fail worldwide. Global food supplies would crumble. And the sky? Imagine a permanent sunset. Red and orange hues painting the horizon at noon, followed by long, cold, dark nights. But hold on. Before we get too dramatic, let's remember. The world has seen volcanic periods before. Massive eruptions like the Deccan traps in India or the Siberian traps in Russia blanketed the sky with ash and gases for thousands of years, and yet life eventually returned. So while this scenario would be catastrophic for humans, Earth itself would survive. Nature would adapt. But let's zoom back in for a second. What would this look like in your neighbourhood? That quiet hill you jog past every morning? Surprise! Turns out it's a dormant volcano. Lava's now pouring down your favourite hiking trail. Those distant mountains you admire from your window, they're throwing ash 10 miles into the sky. And that calm lake down the road, boiling. Planes would be grounded worldwide. Volcanic ash destroys jet engines. Solar panels, now coated in ash, would stop producing electricity. And the world's power grids would strain under the sudden drop in sunlight. Emergency services, completely overwhelmed. And the internet, well, satellites would struggle too as fine volcanic particles drift into low Earth orbit. But it wouldn't be all chaos. Some species, fungi, certain bacteria, even some insects, would thrive in the dark, damp, sulfur-rich environments left behind. In fact, after the chaos settled, volcanic soils would become some of the most fertile on Earth. Ash enriches the ground, creating lush forests and farmland eventually. But not for a while. For years, maybe decades, the world would feel like a cold, dim, post-apocalyptic movie set. And people, being people, would adapt. Underground farms with artificial light, cities heated by geothermal energy, food grown in vertical towers, powered by what little electricity remains. We'd huddle together, waiting for the skies to clear, and maybe during those long dark nights, someone would tell the story of how one day the Earth decided to remind us who's really in charge. And maybe they'd laugh, just a little. Because what else can you do when your world is buried beneath a blanket of ash, except laugh, adapt, and wait for the sun to shine again? But let's not stop there. What happens after that first terrifying day? Well, after the explosions fade and the lava cools, because eventually everything cools, the real long-term effects begin to unfold. The atmosphere is now thick with sulfur dioxide and volcanic ash, not just a thin layer over one continent, but a dense, swirling veil encircling the entire planet. Sunlight struggles to break through, temperatures plunge by several degrees almost overnight. Summer crops fail, vineyards shrivel, wheat fields freeze, and you, standing outside in a thick winter coat in what should have been July, wonder whether it's time to start learning how to grow mushrooms in your basement. But the cold isn't the only problem. The sudden darkness disrupts ecosystems. Plants, deprived of sunlight, stop photosynthesizing. Without plants, herbivores struggle to find food. Without herbivores, predators starve. It's a domino effect and it falls fast. But the oceans? Oh, the oceans take a bit longer to react. Volcanoes beneath the sea, the ones we rarely think about, would release gases into the water, altering its chemistry. Marine life, already stressed by human activity, faces another challenge. acidic, warmer, gas-choked waters. Coral reefs bleach and crumble. Fish populations decline. Fishing industries collapse, adding another blow to global food supplies. But here's a strange twist. In some places, life adapts in unexpected ways. Volcanoes create new land. Islands rise from the sea, still steaming and raw. And on these newborn landscapes, life begins again. Tiny plants take root in the ash. Birds arrive, carried by curiosity or instinct. Over time, new ecosystems form, starting the long, slow process of rebuilding what was lost. But what about us? Humans are notoriously bad at sitting still. In the face of disaster, we adapt, rebuild, and argue endlessly about whose fault it was. Governments would scramble to coordinate disaster relief, though, let's be honest, no one planned for Global Volcano Day. Countries that usually export food would find their crops frozen and stunted. Supply chains would falter. Supermarket shelves would empty faster than you can say, "Where's the bread?" And so people would innovate. Cities might build indoor farms lit by artificial sunlight. Geothermal energy, abundant near volcanic zones, would become a precious resource. Ironic, really, using volcanoes to survive the disasters they caused. And in the cold, dark months, or years that follow, stories would emerge. Stories of how the sky burned black, how the earth shook beneath our feet, how people survived by working together, sharing resources and rediscovering old skills. And maybe after enough time passes, some communities would begin to rebuild not just their homes but their cultures. New holidays, perhaps. Volcano Day, celebrated not with fear, but with gratitude for survival. A day of quiet remembrance, and maybe a few fire-themed desserts, because humanity never misses a chance to make a pun out of a tragedy. But we're still far from celebration. Let's rewind to the first few months after the eruptions. Airports remain closed. Ash clouds linger, making flying dangerous. Solar power generation drops worldwide as the skies stay dark. Fossil fuels, if they still exist in significant quantities, see a resurgence, because in a volcanic winter people will burn anything to stay warm. Meanwhile, entire cities near major volcanoes, Naples, Reykjavik, Quito, would be buried in ash. Evacuation saves some, but not all. Infrastructure crumbles beneath the weight of volcanic debris. And the global economy? Well, you probably don't want to check your stock portfolio anytime soon. Markets would crash, trade would halt, currencies would lose their meaning in a world where the real wealth is food, clean water, and shelter. But amid all this chaos, something else happens. The night sky becomes breathtaking. With so much ash blocking city lights, and the air cleared of smog, the stars would shine brighter than most people have ever seen. The Milky Way would stretch across the heavens like a river of light. And maybe, wrapped in blankets beside makeshift fires, people would look up and feel a strange sense of awe. Because even when the Earth itself seems angry, the universe beyond it remains vast, calm and silent. And that's something. Now, how long does this volcanic winter last? Scientists estimate that large eruptions can affect the climate for 1 to 5 years. With every volcano on Earth erupting at once, we might be looking at decades of cooler, darker conditions. But eventually gravity pulls the ash down, rains wash the skies clean, sunlight filters through once again, and in the rubble and ash, life takes root. Plants regrow in volcanic soil, which, enriched by minerals from deep inside the Earth, is some of the most fertile ground there is. Animals return, humans rebuild, and slowly colour returns to the world. But let's not skip ahead too quickly. Before the sunshine returns and the birds start singing again, there's still the matter of survival. In the first year after the eruptions, global agriculture would be in a full-blown crisis. Without sunlight, crops like wheat, rice, and corn wouldn't grow. Farmers, staring at barren fields, would have to make impossible choices. What little they harvest might feed their families, but it wouldn't be enough for the towns and cities nearby. And what about livestock? Well, without crops to eat, they wouldn't last long either. Grain prices would skyrocket, if anyone's even bothering with currency at this point. Most likely communities would switch to barter and trade, swapping whatever resources they can produce locally. And speaking of local, food would become a regional concern again. Forget global supply chains bringing bananas to Canada and avocados to Norway. If it doesn't grow near you, or in your basement under grow lights, you're not eating it. People would turn to root vegetables, mushrooms and hardy greens that can survive low light and cooler temperatures. So who survives best? Probably the folks who already live in cold, harsh climates. Icelanders, Siberians, Inuit communities. People used to long winters and limited resources. Their knowledge of preserving food, heating homes efficiently, and working together in tough conditions would suddenly become invaluable. Meanwhile, countries in the tropics, used to abundant sun and rainfall, would struggle with the sudden cold snap. But here's a little silver lining. Volcanic eruptions release carbon dioxide, yes, but in this case the cooling effects of the sulfur and ash far outweigh the warming from CO2. Ironically, in the long term, those volcanic gases could help stabilise the climate after the dust settles. But first, we'd have to get through the darkness, and as the months pass, people would adapt in small but meaningful ways. Books would be read by candlelight. Fireside stories would replace television shows. Neighbours would become essential allies instead of strangers. It's funny how a world-ending catastrophe has a way of making people appreciate the little things. But let's not pretend it's all heartwarming montages and community gardens. There would be conflict. Resources would be scarce. Governments would face difficult choices about who gets help and who doesn't. Cities dependent on constant imports, Tokyo, New York, Singapore, would face unrest. But far from the noise, in quiet valleys and remote islands, small communities might thrive, unnoticed by the chaos of the larger world. They'd fish in nearby rivers, farm what little the soil can grow, and build lives from scratch. And someday, they'd tell their children about the year the skies went dark, the mountains roared, and the earth reminded us who was in charge. But what happens to the volcanoes themselves? After such a massive, simultaneous eruption, most would fall silent for centuries. Their magma chambers emptied, their pressure released, they'd return to dormancy, slowly refilling beneath the earth. Geologists, those lucky enough to survive, would have plenty of work ahead of them, mapping new landscapes, studying the chemical composition of the ash, measuring how much Earth's crust shifted during the chaos, and they'd probably argue about what caused the simultaneous eruption in the first place. Was it a fluke, a coincidence, a massive tectonic chain reaction, or something stranger, like the Earth itself letting off steam after holding it in for far too long? But here's the real kicker. Life would go on. The Earth has endured worse. Mass extinctions, meteor impacts, supervolcanoes erupting before humans ever existed. And each time life clawed its way back from the brink. It wouldn't be the same life, of course. Some species would vanish forever. Others would evolve to fill the empty niches left behind. And in a few thousand years, the planet would look vibrant again. Lush forests, teeming oceans, and perhaps small clusters of humans telling stories around fires beneath clear skies. Stories of when the world turned dark, the mountains burned, and the skies wept ash. But for now, as you're lying there, warm and safe in your bed, it's worth remembering. Volcanoes are a reminder that this world is alive beneath its surface. A restless molten heart beats deep below our feet, shaping continents, building islands, and, every once in a while, reminding us that we are guests on this planet, not its masters. So sleep well tonight. No volcanoes are erupting outside your window. Probably. But before we drift off completely, let's imagine what the recovery looks like. After a few long, cold years, the skies finally begin to clear. It starts slowly. Ash particles caught in the upper atmosphere fall back to Earth, washed down by rain and snow. Bit by bit, the sun's rays reach the ground again. Plants, long dormant under blankets of dust, start to sprout. Tiny green shoots poke through the ash, cautious but determined. Forests regrow, first in patches, then in vast, wild stretches. And animals return too. Birds, squirrels, deer, all reclaiming habitats left empty during the long volcanic night. But human civilization doesn't simply hit resume. No, it rebuilds differently. Some cities are gone forever, buried under volcanic rock and ash. Archaeologists of the future will stumble upon them like modern-day Pompeii, silent ruins frozen in time. But other places rise from the ashes, smaller, simpler, maybe wiser. Communities build with volcanic stone, tapping into geothermal heat from the earth below. Farms grow heartier crops, bred for cold and harsh conditions. And energy? Solar panels return when the skies clear, but geothermal and hydroelectric power thrive. Steady, reliable, born from the same forces that once tore the world apart. And as generations pass, the story of the Great Eruption becomes something else entirely, a legend. Some will tell it as a cautionary tale of human arrogance, ignoring the warning signs beneath their feet. Others will tell it as a story of resilience, how life found a way even when the skies went dark. And perhaps some storytellers, sitting by a crackling fire beneath a star-filled sky, will smile and say, "Once upon a time the earth sneezed, and we learned to listen better after that." Because maybe in the end that's what these sleepy little what-ifs remind us. The planet is ancient, powerful, and deeply, wonderfully alive. And we're just part of the story, a tiny chapter in a very big book. So tonight, as you close your eyes and drift into sleep, remember, the volcanoes beneath your feet are quiet now. The sky above is clear, the air still and cool, and while the earth rumbles and shifts far below, for now you are safe and still. The world spins on, and tomorrow the sun will rise again. Probably. All right, let's put away the volcanoes and moon mysteries for a moment and wander into something a little closer to home. Picture this. You wake up one morning, stretch, yawn, and reach for your phone, only to find nothing. No notifications, no emails, no social media scroll to start your day. You try refreshing the news, opening your favourite apps, maybe even toggling your Wi-Fi off and on like some ancient ritual to please the tech gods. But it's not your phone. It's not your Wi-Fi, it's everything, the entire internet, gone. No Google, no YouTube, no sleepy what-if videos to help you drift off. Just silence. Okay, well, not literal silence. Birds are still chirping, cars are still honking, and your neighbour's lawnmower is still somehow ruining your morning peace. But the digital hum, the background noise of modern life, is suddenly missing. So what happens next? First, confusion. People stare at blank screens, wondering if their router is broken. Its support lines light up like Christmas trees, though ironically, they can't do much without the internet either. Coffee shops, offices and libraries are filled with confused people rebooting devices that were never broken to begin with. And then comes the second wave, frustration. Workplaces grind to a halt. Think about it. How much of your daily life depends on the internet without you even realizing it? Emails, cloud storage, online meetings, digital calendars. Without those things, meetings are missed, projects stall, and people sit awkwardly in conference rooms staring at each other like it's 1993 again. But wait, there's more. Financial markets freeze, stock trading platforms stop functioning, online banking shuts down, credit card payments stall in checkout lines worldwide. Grocery stores that rely on internet-connected payment systems suddenly start accepting only cash, if they can open at all. And delivery drivers? They're stuck in parking lots, unable to load their digital routes. But let's zoom out even further. Air traffic control systems, power grids, hospitals, many of them have offline backups, but they still rely heavily on internet-based communication. Without it, delays pile up, coordination gets messy, and the risk of accidents increases. But before we drift too far into disaster territory, remember, this is only for one day. No wars, no asteroid strikes, just 24 hours of unplugged chaos. And honestly, after the panic fades, something kind of magical happens. People start talking. In offices, co-workers pull out notepads and pens, rediscovering the lost art of handwritten to-do lists. In homes, families play board games, read books, or, dare we say it, go outside. Kids ride bikes instead of watching cartoons. Teens sit in awkward silence, unsure what to do without TikTok and memes. And somewhere in a quiet corner of the world, an elderly neighbour sighs and says, "See? I told you we didn't need all that internet nonsense." But for businesses, the financial toll is real. Estimates suggest that a single day of global internet outage could cost the world economy tens of billions of dollars. E-commerce giants like Amazon and Alibaba lose millions by the hour. Streaming services miss out on subscription renewals and ad revenue. Content creators, yes, even sleepy scriptwriters like me, find their videos stuck in digital limbo waiting to upload. But the real cost is in the uncertainty. Without clear answers about why the internet is down, people start imagining the worst. Is it a cyber attack, a solar flare, some rogue AI pulling the plug, or maybe, just maybe, the internet itself needed a break. After all, we overload it every second with emails, cat videos, online orders, and endless conspiracy theories. Maybe the servers just sighed, threw up their hands and said, "I need a nap." But back to reality. Governments would scramble to communicate with their citizens through TV, radio, and good old-fashioned press briefings. Emergency alerts would go out via text message and landlines, assuming those still work. Tech companies would hold frantic emergency meetings, sending engineers racing to data centers and fiber optic hubs worldwide. And meanwhile, most people would do what they always do in a crisis: complain, adapt, and wait it out. Because deep down we know the internet isn't gone forever. It's too big to disappear without a trace. So people breathe, they adjust, they step outside and realize the world is still here, birds are still flying, waves are still crashing, and somewhere, someone is making coffee without watching a YouTube tutorial about how to make coffee. But now let's get a little more practical. What happens to communication? Sure, you can still call someone on a landline if you can find one, but let's face it, most people today wouldn't know where to begin without WhatsApp, Slack, or email. Businesses would dig up old phone trees, the kind where managers have to personally call their teams one by one. Office workers would print paper memos for the first time in years, maybe decades. TV and radio would suddenly be cool again. News anchors would break into regular programming to share updates like, "The internet is still down, folks, please stay calm," followed by some cheerful weather forecast that feels weirdly irrelevant right now. But strangely, the world wouldn't be quiet. Without the internet, people would fill the void with their own noise. Neighbours would lean over fences to chat. Kids would shout across parks. And offices would buzz with actual conversations instead of silent Slack messages and email threads. And somewhere, in dusty basements and forgotten closets, old board games and paperbacks would see the light of day again. But let's check in on some industries that would really feel the hit. First, transportation. Ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft, gone for the day. Package tracking. Sorry, your out for delivery notification isn't going to arrive today. Traffic lights in smart cities that rely on cloud updates, frozen on whatever setting they last had. Imagine intersections stuck on red for hours. Chaos in slow motion. And how about entertainment? No Netflix, no Spotify, no YouTube. People would suddenly remember that DVDs and vinyl records exist. Gaming consoles with offline modes would become the MVPs of the living room, and books, yes, actual books with pages, would make a glorious comeback for at least one day. Libraries, those quiet, overlooked buildings, would see an unexpected boom in visitors looking for something, anything to fill the time. But it wouldn't all be peaceful nostalgia. Let's talk finances again because, well, money tends to make people nervous. Banking systems would struggle. Online banking down, stock trades halted, international currency transfers. Nope. Cash would briefly reclaim its throne. You'd see people lining up at ATMs, hoarding bills like it's 1999 and Y2K all over again. And it's not just Wall Street. Small businesses would be hit too. Without payment apps or credit card processing, it's back to cash and handwritten receipts. Some cafes might just shrug, give out free coffee and say, "Come back tomorrow when the Wi-Fi works." But here's a curious thing. Not everything would collapse. Plenty of systems would keep working just fine. The power grid would still hum along. Water treatment plants would still filter your tap water. Gas stations, well, the pumps might be a problem if they're controlled online, but the fuel is still in the ground, waiting. Life wouldn't end, it would just slow down. And in that slowdown, some people might feel something unusual. Relief. For the first time in years, no one's refreshing their inbox every 30 seconds. No one's doom scrolling through social media arguments about pineapple on pizza or the latest celebrity feud. Instead, there's silence, space to think. But of course, not everyone would be calm. Some people would panic, imagining this is the start of something bigger. And to be fair, they're not wrong to wonder. A full global internet outage? That's not something that happens by accident. Engineers would work around the clock to trace the cause. Maybe it's a massive cyber attack targeting core internet infrastructure. Maybe it's a glitch in a handful of undersea cables connecting continents. Or maybe it's a rare cosmic event, a solar flare or a magnetic anomaly that fried global networks temporarily. Whatever the reason, the internet outage would be one of the most carefully studied events in human history. And when the fix finally comes, it wouldn't be instant. Restarting the internet isn't like flipping a light switch. Data centers need rebooting. Routers and servers need resetting. Cloud systems need to resync their scattered bits of information. And when the internet finally hums back to life, after hours of darkness, the world breathes a collective sigh of relief. Phones ping and buzz like digital fireworks. Emails flood inboxes. Social media timelines fill with posts like, "We're back," and "That was scary, LOL." Memes are created within minutes naturally. And just like that, the chaos fades. But here's the question. Do people go right back to scrolling and refreshing and buying and posting as if nothing happened? Or does something change? Do they pause, just for a moment, and remember what it felt like to sit quietly, without endless notifications calling for their attention? Let's be honest, most people probably go right back to scrolling. Humans love their habits, and the internet, with all its chaos and charm, is hard to resist. But maybe, for a few people, the day without it lingers in the back of their minds. Maybe someone remembers how peaceful their morning walk was without checking the news. Maybe a family remembers how nice it felt to play a board game without competing with endless notifications. Maybe, just maybe, someone writes a letter instead of an email. But on the global stage, there'd be bigger conversations. Governments and tech companies would hold emergency summits. How do we prevent this from happening again? Are our digital systems too centralized, too fragile, too dependent on a few key cables and servers? And out of those conversations might come new backups, better defenses, and smarter ways to protect the internet from future blackouts. Engineers would create more offline fail-safes. Businesses would build better contingency plans. And maybe your phone would finally have an offline mode that isn't just a sad little message saying, "No connection." But let's zoom back into everyday life for one last sleepy thought. The next morning, life feels a little different. People return to their emails and social feeds, but maybe they scroll a little slower. Maybe they notice how blue the sky is, or how quiet the park feels without headphones in their ears. And somewhere, far from the buzz of notifications and news updates, a person sits with a cup of coffee, enjoying the rarest thing of all in the digital age: silence. The internet gave us a glimpse of the life without itself, and in doing so, reminded us of what we sometimes miss when we're always connected. So the next time your Wi-Fi glitches out or your phone loses signal, maybe don't panic. Maybe just sit still, take a breath, and enjoy the rare peace of disconnection. Because when the noise returns, and it always does, you'll be grateful you took a moment to enjoy the quiet. And as you drift off to sleep tonight, here's the thought to hold on to. The world spins on, with or without the internet, and sometimes the quietest nights are the ones we need most.